You know, when you grab a candy bar or a pack of gummies, you're probably not thinking about business strategy. It's just a simple, sweet treat. But behind that colorful wrapper, there's actually a really fascinating story about some seriously high profits and the intense pressures threatening to squeeze them. So let's unwrap the numbers, shall we? All right, first things first. Let's follow the money. How is the confectionery business actually doing, financially speaking? You might be a little surprised at just how sweet those profits really are. Okay, just look at this. The difference here is huge. For 2025, the confectionery business is looking at a margin of 31%. Now compare that to snacks and namkeen, which are actually running at a negative 4% margin. Wow, that's a massive gap. It really makes you wonder, what's the secret ingredient to these incredible profits? And it's not just about the margins either. Check out their revenue trend. Yeah, there was a little dip in 2024, but then it just roared back, growing by 11% in 2025. This tells us that our love for these treats is super resilient. Even after a down year, people come back wanting more. So, we know the margins are high and demand is strong. But what does it actually cost to make all this stuff? Let's break down the expenses and see where the money's really going, because that's where you start to see where the pressure is building. Now, you'd think the biggest cost would be the ingredients, right? The sugar, the cocoa, all the raw materials. But look here. Cost of material consumed is only 12% of the pie. The biggest slice, by a long shot, is something else entirely. And that something is direct labor. It makes up a pretty staggering 36.8% of total costs. That is a huge piece of the expense puzzle. It tells you right away that this is a labor-intensive industry, and managing those workforce costs is absolutely crucial if you want to protect those amazing margins we just saw.
Numbers on a chart are one thing, but what are the people on the ground, the leaders of these companies, actually saying? To get the real story behind the data, let's hear it directly from them.
And here we go. Here's a major pressure point. Sampry Nutritions is calling out extreme volatility. So even though materials are only 12% of their costs, when a key ingredient like cocoa spikes by 140%, well, that can seriously chew into your profits. That is a major headache for anyone in the chocolate business. But it's not all about rising costs. On the flip side, you have Toppy Flute Processing pointing to a really powerful growth driver, convenience. And this highlights a fascinating shift. While the chocolate makers are worried about cocoa, the demand for other things, like jellies and gummies, is just surging. Okay, so let's piece this all together. What are the big threats that are putting those sweet margins at risk? When you look at the data and listen to the industry leaders, a pretty clear picture starts to form. Challenge number one is that crazy spike in cocoa prices we just heard about. A 140% increase in 1 year is just a massive headwind. It forces companies into a tough spot. Do you absorb the cost and watch your margins shrink, or do you raise prices and risk losing customers? Not an easy choice. The second challenge is a little more indirect, kind of sneaky. It's about global trade. U.S. tariffs, some as high as 50%, are creating a ripple effect. It's not a direct tax on candy, but for companies with global supply chains, it's raising the cost of inputs and logistics, adding yet another layer of expense. And finally, the marketplace itself is just a battleground. You've got these massive multinational giants going head-to-head with small, agile local companies. And on top of all that, there's the looming possibility of new regulations, like forcing companies to put health warnings on the front of the pack, which could change the game entirely. But hey, for every challenge, there's an opportunity, right? This industry isn't just sitting back and playing defense. Leaders are actively jumping on new trends and consumer habits to find new ways to grow. This one is a total game changer, quick commerce. With deliveries up 150%, those apps that can get snacks to your door in like 10 minutes have become a major channel for impulse buys. This completely flips the old distribution model on its head and gives companies a direct line to hungry customers. Now here's something interesting. Even with cocoa prices going through the roof, the premium chocolate segment is booming. It's growing at a steady 7 to 8% every year. This is being driven by things like gifting for special occasions and holidays, and it gives companies a clear path to sell higher-margin products. And lastly, there's this growing demand for sweets that do a little something extra. We're talking sugar-free options, candies fortified with vitamins, or functional gummies. This is opening up an entirely new health-conscious market for companies to innovate in. So after looking at the profits, the costs, the threats, and the opportunities, what's the big takeaway here? What does this all boil down to? Well, it all comes down to this core tension. The confectionery world is an industry that enjoys these fantastically high margins, but those profits are really fragile. They're constantly being attacked by rising costs, especially for labor and key ingredients. So to win, companies have to perform a really tricky balancing act. They have to be relentless about managing their costs, while at the same time innovating like crazy to meet our changing tastes for premium, convenient, and even healthier treats. And that really leaves us with a final question. With ingredient prices hitting all-time highs and all of us demanding more from our snacks, the old way of doing business is being seriously tested. The future of this delicious industry is really going to depend on whether it can not just survive the storm, but actually innovate its way to a whole new level of success.